Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take those fascinating sources you share and, well, really extract the key knowledge efficiently for you.
That's the goal.
Today, we're heading back, way back to the late Cretaceous. Imagine the landscape that's now Chile's Atacama Desert.
A very different world then, of course.
Exactly. You've given us some really solid scientific documentation, and our mission today is to unpack the story of a dinosaur genus called Atacamatitan.
A fascinating one.
Yeah, so get ready for hopefully a concise but thorough look at its discovery, what made it unique, and, where it fits in the grand scheme of titanosaurs.
Right. And we're not just rooting off facts. We're trying to guide you through how scientists figure this stuff out, especially from, well, often quite fragmented remains.
Piecing it all together.
Exactly. These sources really detail the expeditions, the analysis. It's quite the detective story.
Okay, let's dive in. The name first. Atacamatitan. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
It does. Atacama Desert Titan. Makes sense.
And the species name chilensis obviously points to Chile. Now, the sources mention a preliminary expedition, February 2000. This was a joint Chilean-Brazilian effort.
That's right. Researchers from the Chilean National Museum of Natural History and Brazil's National Museum. They were specifically looking for Mesozoic fossils, and this trip led them to the Toller Formation.
Which is in the Antofagasta region.
Oh.
What kind of place was this Toller Formation?
The papers describe it as layers of ancient rock. Think red breccias, conglomerates, sandstones, basically snapshots of the environment Atacamatitan lived in.
And it wasn't until the second trip, July 2001, that they really found something significant.
Correct. Near a town called Conchi Viejo, on this tiny outcrop, just 2 square meters or so, that's where they found the holotype.
And the holotype, just to clarify for everyone, that's the specific specimen used to define the species, right?
Exactly, the reference point. And crucially, these remains, cataloged as SGOPV 961, they all belong to just one individual animal.
Which must be incredibly helpful.
Oh, absolutely. It avoids the confusion of mixing bones from different animals.
Yeah.
Even with an incomplete skeleton, knowing it's all one individual gives you much more confidence in the reconstruction.
Makes sense. And the official naming Atacamatitan chilensis came quite a bit later, in 2011.
Yes, and it became one of the most complete titanosaurs known from Chile at the time. That holotype, SGOPV 961, is now kept safe at the Chilean National Museum of Natural History.
Okay, now, there's a bit of uncertainty about the age of the Toller Formation itself. The sources suggest it could span from late Cretaceous all the way to the Paleocene. That seems like a big range.
It is, yeah. Geological dating can be tricky sometimes, but finding Atacamatitan there really helps narrow it down, or at least part of it.
How so? Because titanosaurs were mainly a Cretaceous thing.
Precisely. Titanosaurs were dominant giant herbivores during the late Cretaceous. Finding one in those rocks strongly suggests that layer, at least, dates back to the Cretaceous period. It's like a fossil timestamp, you know?
Got it. Like finding an artifact that only existed in a certain era. Okay, so we've got the who, what, where, and a rough when. Let's get into the actual bones, the holotype. SGOPV 961, what did they find?
Well, it's a partial skeleton, but with some key parts. There's a right femur, the thigh bone, and the top part, the proximal end, of a humerus, the upper arm bone.
Okay.
Also, 2 dorsal vertebrae from the back, some tail vertebrae, caudal vertebrae from the posterior end, several ribs from the back, and possibly a piece of the sternum, the breastbone.
And some other bits and pieces too fragmented to be sure about.
Exactly. Some more fragments of tail vertebrae and other indeterminate bones.
And the condition. The description mentions slightly distorted, reddish, heavy.
Yeah. The reddish color likely comes from minerals in the surrounding rock staining the bone over millions of years. And heavy because of permineralization.
Ah, right. Where minerals seep in and basically turn the bone to stone.
Pretty much, yeah. Groundwater-carrying dissolved minerals fills all the tiny pores in the bone, making it much denser and heavier. It's how fossils get preserved so well sometimes.
And there's a weight estimate mention from Thomas Holtz, around 8 to 16 tons.
That's the figure cited, yes. Gives you a sense of the scale we're talking about, a big animal.
Definitely. So what made the scientists look at these bones and say, hold on, this is something new? What are the distinguishing features?
According to Kellner and his colleagues who described it in 2011, there are a few key anatomical details. One is in the dorsal vertebrae, the backbones, specifically the centrum, the main body of the vertebra.
Okay.
They have these things called pluricoles, little hollows or pockets, likely for air sacs, which helped lighten the skeleton. In Atacamatitan, these are curved and Importantly, they don't point backwards, like in some other titanosaurs.
Interesting. What else?
The underside, the ventral surface of those same dorsal vertebrae is concave. It curves inwards. Also, the tail vertebrae, the posterior ones, have a neural spine, the blade sticking upwards that's compressed side to side with a sharp front edge.
Okay. And the femur, the thigh bone.
The femur's proximal end, the part near the hip, it sort of tapers, gradually reducing in width for about 2/3 of its length. That was noted as distinctive, too.
Let's focus on those vertebrae for a sec. They sound key. 2 dorsal vertebrae were found, SGO-PV961A and B. What about A?
Right, SGO-PV961A. It has an elongated centrum, and those pluricoles are described as rounded, not as long and slit-like as in some other titanosaurs. The neural arch on top is missing, but its base suggests it was probably wider than high.
And it's described as opistocoelic. You hear that term a lot. Can you break that down?
Sure. Opistocoelic just describes the shape of the ends of the centrum. Think ball and socket. In opistocoelic vertebrae, the back end is concave, like a socket, and the front end is convex, like a ball.
Ah, so they fit together nicely.
Exactly. It allows for more flexibility, a greater range of motion in the spine compared to vertebrae with flat ends, for example.
Okay, got it. And the second dorsal, SGO-PV961B.
That one's a bit more compressed front to back. It does have part of the neural arch preserved, and it's also opistocoelic. But the really key thing here, mentioned again, is that strongly concave ventral margin the underside.
Right. The sources specifically contrast that with other titanosaurs like Gondwanatitan, Saltosaurus, Trigonosaurus, Uberabatitan.
Precisely. And again, those rounded pluricoles not pointing backwards. These might seem like minor details, but they're the kind of anatomical fingerprints scientists use to differentiate species.
It's amazing how much detail they can glean. What about the tailbones, the caudal vertebrae? A couple were well preserved.
Yes, 2 from the middle and posterior part of the tail. SGO-PV961C is just the centrum, no neural arch. It's described as dorsoventrally compressed, sort of flattened top to bottom.
And no pluricoles in this one.
Correct, lacks pluricoles.
Yeah.
But it does have 2 little processes on the underside for attaching the chevrons.
Chevrons. Those are the V-shaped bones underneath the tail vertebrae.
That's them, also called hemal arches. They protect blood vessels and nerves running under the tail and provide anchor points for tail muscles. So seeing where they attach tells us something about the tail's structure. The centrum itself has curved bottom and side surfaces.
Okay. And the other well-preserved one, SGO-PV961F.
That one's nearly complete, just missing a small bit on the right side. Centrum is similar to the other one, C, but smaller and angled slightly backward. What's noticeable here are the presicapophyses.
Uh-oh, another technical term.
Yeah. Think of them as little arms reaching forward from the top front of the vertebra. They overlap with the vertebra in front, helping to lock the spine together and control movement.
Like little connectors.
Kind of. On this vertebra, they're quite elongated, almost 1/3 of the centrum's length. The projections on the back that they connect to the presicapophyses are small and located low down on the neural spine, and the neural arch is preserved on the front half.
So much detail packed into one bone.
It really is. The shape and size of all these bits tell you about flexibility, stiffness, how the tail moved.
Okay, moving away from the spine, what about ribs?
There's one fairly complete rib mentioned, SGO-PV961D. It's compressed front to back, but taller than it is wide. The ends that connect to the vertebra, the capitulum and tuberculum, are fragmented.
Did it have those air pockets, the pneumatic foramina, like some other titanosaurs?
That's the interesting thing. They couldn't tell for sure. It wasn't clear if they were present or not, which could be another difference, potentially.
And the sternal plate, the breastbone piece.
Very fragmentary, described as thin, smooth border, but just too incomplete to know its full shape or size.
Okay. Then the arm bone, the humerus, also fragmented.
Yes, very. Just the proximal end, the top part, is preserved. But they noted the distal end, the lower part, seems relatively reduced. There was also a clear depression on the front, likely for muscle attachment.
And finally, the femur, the thigh bone again. It was described as relatively gracile, slender.
Yeah, slender compared to the other bones they found for this individual, which led the researchers to suggest, maybe, that Atacamatitan had proportionally stronger forelimbs.
That is interesting. We usually picture sauropods being hind limb dominant. Could that be a unique feature?
It could be, yeah. What scientists call a potential autapomorphy, a unique derived trait for that specific genus. It raises questions about its posture, movement, maybe even feeding.
How long's the femur?
Measured at 1.10 meters, so 110 centimeters. The very top, the ball part that fits into the hip socket, was missing. But it had a well-developed fourth trochanter, that's a ridge for muscle attachment, running down the upper part of the bone.
Okay, last big piece, classification. Where does Atacamatitan sit in the Titanosaur family tree?
Well, the original 2011 paper placed it broadly within the Titanosauridae family. But because the skeleton is incomplete, it often gets left out of the big, complex cladistic analyses, the computer-based family trees.
Right. Not enough data points.
Sort of, yeah. But there was a preliminary analysis in 2012 by Rubler, Rogers, and Goodstein. They placed it within a major subgroup called Lithostrotia. These are considered the more advanced titanosaurs.
Okay, within Lithostrotia. But where exactly?
That's where it gets a bit fuzzy. Their analysis put it in what's called a polydemy.
A paludamatomy. What's that?
It basically means the analysis couldn't resolve its exact relationships further. It showed Atacamatitan branching off at the same point as Nemegtosaurus, Rapetosaurus, Titanosaurus itself, and the whole Saltasauridae family.
So it's in that group, but they couldn't tell which it was most closely related to.
Exactly, like several branches coming off the same spot on the tree trunk. The data wasn't clear enough to separate them further. It just means we need more fossils, more data to really pin down its precise spot. It highlights how science is always refining things.
Absolutely. So wrapping up Atacamatitan, discovered in Chile's Atacama, known from this single partial skeleton, some really distinctive features in its vertebrae, and maybe this interesting limb proportion thing. Still some questions about its exact family ties within the titanosaurs.
That sums it up well. An important piece of the South American late Cretaceous puzzle.
Definitely. And considering how incomplete it is, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other discoveries in that region might help clarify things? What else is waiting out there in the Atacama? It's a fascinating thought about how much we still have to learn.
It really is. Paleontology is always an ongoing discovery. There's always more out there.